So, it seems you found yourself at the campsite of the Orator. Well, as you can see, I have stoked the fire, which means it's time to pull up your chair and settle in, because I have another tale to tell. Ghosts. Every culture has great ghost stories. Every culture has the supernatural phenomenon of spirits that wander around. But what do you do when you actually encounter one? What do you do when an apparition actually vanishes before your eyes? Let's settle in tonight for a good old-fashioned ghost story. But before we begin today's tale, if you found yourself enjoying this kind of content, first-hand true accounts of the supernatural, paranormal, things that go bump in the night, then allow the spirits to guide your planchette to both the like and subscribe button as well as the notification bell. That way you get notified every time I upload new content, which is twice a week, every Monday and Friday at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. Second, of course, all of my stories are true first-hand accounts of the supernatural and paranormal. Today's story comes from us from Redditor PoloMan76. I will make sure to link the original story in the comments below, but if you or anybody you know has a story and you think it would fit well on my channel, just reach out to me on any of my social media and we'll find a time to get together, collect your story, and potentially one day feature it here on The Orator. And now, with all of that out of the way, let's get on to today's tale. It is a story that I call Swimming with the Alligators. It is February of 1985, and we are outside of Homestead, Florida. And Dale and Ryan are good friends. They're in their late 20s, and one of the things they love to do is go fishing. And right now where they're fishing is this really interesting place called the Double Canals, or it's sometimes called the East Glade. And kind of how this structure is set up. Think of this land this way. It's this massive plot of land, several miles by several miles. I mean, we're talking a very large stretch of land here. And kind of how it works is, this land is divided up into farmland that slowly descends into marshland the further away from town that you go. But all of this farmland was sort of set up very specifically in grids. And so bisecting all of these farms and eventually even into the swamps are obviously roadways, but the roadways go directly north and south and east and west to make these perfect squares and grids. But then there are also these two giant canals that feed from the outside lakes inland, and it is basically a giant irrigation system from the swamps to irrigate water into all of these fields for all the crops. And so there's these two giant canals that run through the land. And then, of course, there are these smaller sections that jut off from the giant canals, and there's a few of those. And then there are even smaller ones that are like these ditches that run by all the roadways called jumpers. And the reason they're called jumpers is because you can literally jump over them. They're just wide enough to where a person can jump across from them. And the reason that this whole stretch of land is called the Double Canals, of course, is because of these two giant canals that run through this area. Now, Dale and Ryan, they have fished this area a ton of times. They love it, and it's what they do like on their days off and their free time. And it's currently evening, and they are out kind of where the farmland ends and where all of the swampland is sort of beginning. That's where they're at, and they're sort of smack dab in the middle of this giant plot of this land. And they're literally just fishing the jumpers. So basically, fish come from the swamp, and they come through the canals and eventually make their way into the smaller intersections of these jumpers, and then they can just fish them, catch, and they're right next to their car on the road. And so it's easy to just drive out there, pop out, fish for a little while, pop back in their truck, and head out. And that's exactly what they're doing, and they're really enjoying themselves, they're having fun. And actually, Ryan is around the corner, and Dale is kind of by himself just fishing and sort of enjoying things. And all of a sudden, as he's fishing, he looks down the road, and from the direction of the swamps, he sees somebody walking down the road from that direction. And it's a little bit strange because there's nothing out here. I mean, there's farmland, but there are no farmhouses anywhere near here. It's just farmland. And then the direction she's walking from is just all swampland. It's literally the opposite direction from the only town in a long distance. And so, she's really, really far away. He can't even really see that it's a woman yet. It's just a figure walking towards him. And so he just keeps fishing, but he's sort of keeping an eye on it. And he thinks she's maybe like almost a whole mile away, like maybe 3/4 of a mile away as she's walking. And so he's not really paying attention. He's fishing, but every once in a while he looks over. And after about a half an hour, she gets close enough to be able to see, which means she's moving really, really slowly. And as she's, walking closer, the sun is going down and it's getting darker, so it's kind of harder for Dale to be able to see. But she eventually does get close enough for him to take a good look at her. And she walks up, and she's a younger woman. She's got kind of long, brown, mousy hair, and the hair itself is sort of disheveled. Dale said it almost looked like she had gone swimming earlier and then just sort of let it dry, and she didn't brush it out or anything. So it's sort of tangled and messy and all around the place. And she had on a pink t-shirt with a teddy bear on it, and then there was nothing else. She had underwear on, but no pants, no shoes, and she's ashen colored, but not super pale. But as he's looking at her, he notices she's not really dirty. Like, not even her feet are dirty, which is odd because she's obviously been walking all the way up the road, but then he knows that whole land is marshland, and so she should be, like, honestly kind of filthy. So she is very, very clean, which is really, really weird. And then, of course, she has no shoes on at all, and she's in the middle of nowhere, and all she has on is this shirt. And it's just a very confusing situation for Dale, but she walks right up to him, and right away she asks him for a cigarette. And he just says that he doesn't have one, and he's, looking more confused than anything else, and she just stares at him blankly when he says he doesn't have a cigarette. She doesn't follow up with anything. She doesn't try to give him any details. She just stands there staring at him. And so Dale, he's still fishing, and he's waiting for something to happen, and nothing does. And so he just starts asking this girl some questions. He just says, hey, what are you doing out here? Like, you're in the middle of nowhere. Why are you out here? And she just looks at him. She says, well, earlier I was just swimming with the alligators. And he thought that was just a really weird answer. Like, she's literally out in the swamp swimming with the alligators. And so now, as he's starting to process this situation, he thinks she might be like a call girl, a lady of the night, a prostitute. Because she has no clothes on, and she's pretty looking, and she's petite, and she's well put together. She looks healthy. She doesn't look confused or crazy. She doesn't seem like she's lost or worried. It's like she's supposed to be out here. Like, she's totally comfortable with where she's at and everything. And so, Dale is left to think, like, maybe somebody took her out here and left her out here. Maybe she's in trouble or something like that. And so he says, he just asks her, like, who took you out here? Who dropped you off out here? And she just looks at him, and she's very forlorn. She says, they left me out here. And he's like, okay, that's really confusing. So he says, do you want me to, like, give you a ride home then? If they left you out here, I could give you a ride home. And, she just looks at him, and she just says, I don't have anywhere to go. I don't have any home to go to. And he's like, all right, well, I can't in good conscience just leave you out here. I mean, we're miles away from any kind of civilization. It's almost dark. You don't even have clothes on. And yes, we're in Florida, but it's February, and it's supposed to drop to like 40 degrees tonight. It's too cold for you to just be out here. I can't in good conscience leave you out here. So we'll figure something out. I can drop you off at a gas station. I can give you a couple bucks, and you'll be good. She just says, okay, I'll wait over there. And then without saying another word, she turns, and she walks over to his truck, and she sits down in front of his truck, and then she just sort of takes her shirt and tucks it over her knees, and she just sort of sits there huddled. And this whole situation, it's so strange to Dale that he decides he's going to go talk to his friend Ryan. So he goes around the corner to where Ryan is fishing, and Ryan hasn't seen or heard any of this. And so he goes around the corner, and he goes up to Ryan. He's like, dude, you're not going to believe this. And so they start to discuss what happened. And very quickly, Ryan comes to the same conclusion that Dale came to, that she's probably a prostitute. And so he just says, like, well, did she, like, proposition you? Did she try to take you on as a client? And Dale's like, no, she didn't. And so that makes him think something even stranger is going on out here. And so he thinks, well, maybe we're going to, like, maybe this is a trap. Maybe she's going to she's going to set us up to put her in the car and drive us somewhere, and then when we go in that direction, other people are going to like attack us, and it's some kind of trap to rob us or something. And so they're maybe discussing that, and then Dale says, well, no, and he's got a big pistol. He's like, I think she saw my gun. I don't think that we would be the right targets for something like that. And so at some point they decide, all right, well, we'll take her into town. There's a good place we could drop her off at like a gas station where, you know, nobody around hopefully will see us and think something happened, and we don't want that kind of reputation, but we also want to make sure that she's safe. And so they kind of discuss all the details of that, and then they decide, all right, that's what we're going to do. And so they make their way back to the truck, and they just tell her, hey, we're going to drop you off in town. Don't worry about it. As long as you're cool hanging out until we're done fishing, we'll do that. She just nods. And so they finish fishing, they wrap everything up, and they eventually get into Dale's car, and it's one of his prized possessions. It's this beautiful old Chevelle muscle car, and it's a four-door. So she gets in the back, they get in the front, and they start heading off back to town. And as they're heading back to town, Ryan starts questioning this girl, and he basically asks her kind of the same questions that Dale did. You know, he says, hey, what were you doing out there? And right away, once again, she says, almost like it's on a loop, she says, I was out swimming with the alligators. And Dale remembers thinking how weird it was that they're in Florida, and she kept using the whole word alligator. He's like, everybody around here calls them just gators. I was out swimming with the gators if you were going to do something crazy like that. But to call them alligators, it just seemed weird to him. And so Ryan, he continues to ask questions. Well, who took you out there? Why were you out there? Who was out there with you? And she just once again repeats, they left me out there. And Ryan's like, okay. He's like, well, where do we drop you in town? Is there like a house you can go to or family you can go to? And once again, she says, there's nobody in town for me. I don't have any family there. And, they're very confused. And Ryan follows this up and he's like, surely there must be somebody that you know in town. You can't know nobody. And she just says, they're all gone. And it's so confusing and weird, and the responses are so odd that at some point, Dale and Ryan just decide, never mind, this isn't what we're talking about, let's just take her into town. And so they ride the rest of the way in silence. And so they're driving along, and just when they're maybe like a half mile away from the actual city proper, where there's finally starting to be houses and stuff like that, civilization, they're getting right to the cusp of that, when all of a sudden this girl from the back seat just freaks out. She's like, we have to go back. I forgot my shoes. And at this point, it's getting really late, and they've driven 45 minutes back to town. And Dale's like, girl, you can get shoes anywhere. You could buy new shoes. We're not going to drive all the way back and get you new shoes. And she's just totally insistent. No, I need my shoes. I have to get my shoes. And Dale's like, no offense, I'm not doing that. I'm not turning around. I'm not driving all the way back there just so you can get your shoes. You can go tomorrow and get your shoes or figure something else out, but I'm not going to take you back. If you want to ride with me, we're going into town. And she just says, no, I need to go back. I must get my high heels. And he's like, okay, that's weird. And so he just pulls over, stops, she gets out, and he lets her go get her shoes. And he closes the door, and as she's getting out and he's closing the door, his friend Ryan turns to him and he says, dude, she was a spook. And Dale is confused because the word spook can mean a spy. And so he's thinking that Ryan is thinking that this is some kind of setup or something weird like that. And he's like, no, dude, she's not anything like that. She's just, she's just a prostitute. There's nothing weird going on here. And Ryan's like, no, dude, she's like a spirit. She's a ghost. And, right away, Dale, he starts laughing at him, and they're joking about it. But as Dale is kind of making fun of Ryan, he looks in the rearview mirror to see this girl, and he sees that she's not there. It's like this big road behind them, right? This big, very wide road. And then on either side are the canals, the jumpers. And then everywhere else, literally as far as the eye can see, it's just fields. And the crops are gone at this point because it's February. And so that's not even there's tall crops anywhere. It's very, very low to the ground. I mean, there is nowhere for a person to hide. There's not a bush, there's not a tree, nowhere to hide. And so Dale and Ryan, they get out of the car, and they're literally surveying the entire land, and they can't see anything. It's like she's gone. And so even though Dale doesn't believe in this stuff, and he's trying to make fun of Ryan about it, he just doesn't have an explanation for where she could have possibly gone. And so that's it. They ride back to town, and they're totally confused about the entire thing. And really, they didn't have the wherewithal to even tell anybody about it. It was so strange. And so Dale says, he told his wife, but then he never mentioned it to anybody else because he just didn't think anybody would believe him. Until one night, he was sitting at dinner with his dad, and they were just kind of having a conversation. And he just mentioned, he's like, just told his dad, hey, I never told you about this story, but it was just the weirdest thing, and I don't know I don't have an explanation for it. And so he tells his dad this story, and his dad gets this dead serious look on his face. And he said his dad is a totally serious guy, never likes to prank or anything like that. He's like a serious dude. And his dad was actually the pastor of their local church. So he's also a man who took these kinds of things very seriously. And he says, it is the weirdest thing that you say that, because about 50 years ago, I was fishing out in the same spots, out in the double canals, and he said, I swear to you, a woman just like you're describing came up to me. He said, this woman only had high heels on and didn't have anything else on, and she also asked me for a cigarette. And I remember that's the very first thing she asked for, because I thought, how bizarre that she's out here totally naked and she seems totally unconcerned, and this is the first thing that she asked for. And he said, I turned her down, and then he said, I just got in my vehicle and left because I was too worried about what that situation was going on. He said, but how odd is it that 50 years apart, the exact same thing happens? And so, Dale and his dad and eventually Ryan they talked to, they're just all left to conclude only one thing. If you are out fishing in the jumpers, out in the double canals, you have every chance to potentially run into this spirit, this woman who was swimming with the alligators. And so that's going to do it for today's story. If you found yourself enjoying this story or any of the other ones on my channel, first-hand true accounts of the supernatural, paranormal, things that go bump in the night, that allow the spirits to guide your play and chat, to both the like and subscribe button as well as the notification bell. That way you get notified every time I upload new content, which is twice a week, every Monday and Friday. Second, of course, all of my stories are true first-hand accounts of the supernatural and paranormal. So if you or anyone you know has a story and you think it would fit well on my channel, reach out to me on any of my social media. We'll find a time to collect your story and potentially one day feature it here on The Orator. And so until next time, we will pull up your chair and settle in. My fire will be stoked, and I'll have another tale to tell.